Okay, as you can see, I can buy the lantern item. Now it's max level. When I hit play, nothing happens. But when I encounter the fog, you can see that the lantern appears and tells me how much fuel I have left. And because I have the lantern, I can see through the fog much better. If I collect enough boot in a row, I can get a bonus, which as you can see gives me some extra fuel for the lantern. And right now I don't have any other item, so I can only get bonus gold or bonus fuel for the lantern. But let's say I also buy the nets item. Now when I play, when I use one of the nets, so I have less than the maximum amount, I can also get the next item, as you can see. Perfect! Hi, I'm Ricky. Today we're on the 24th episode of the Endless Runner series, and in this episode we'll take a look on how to implement a new item to our game. This new item is a lantern, a type of item that will lower the fog and will allow the player to see better through it. This item also uses a fuel system, so it has a limited duration, which brings us to our next topic, expanding on the player bonus feature to give the player the opportunity to get more fuel for the lantern. If you don't remember, the player bonus is an effect that triggers when the player collects enough beauties in a row. Right now, when you activate the bonus, you get some extra money. I want to expand it so that the player also has the chance to get some extra fuel for the lantern and also an extra net, a type of item that we made in an earlier episode. This series is based on a video game that I've already made and published called BoatVenture. If you want to know how this finished product will look like, do check it out, link in the description. It's free for all Android devices 9+ on the Play Store. Alright, so let's start. Let's make the new item, so I'm gonna go in the second page and I'm also gonna import the sprite that we are gonna use today. You can use this sprite and all the sprites that I've used so far for free, link in the description. Alright, so now I'm just gonna change the image and the text of this item, you know the drill. Alright, also let's go in the shop item script and let's replace the dummy value with lantern. Alright, so now we can buy it. Yep, I'm gonna keep it to level 1 for now, and we've made the item. Now to actually add the code, let's select our boot player, let's make and add a new component, and I'm gonna call it lantern. In here we want to know the level of our lantern item and the amount of fuel that we have. We could just get from the player pref or the item name to get the level of the lantern, but I prefer storing it in a value so that we don't call the player pref functions all the time. As you may have spotted, we're using an integer for the lantern fuel. That is because instead of using an update function, we're going to use a coroutine to make things more efficient. Now I'm going to set the lantern level in a function, and that function is going to be a public void start script. And this is just a general player prefs function. Now, as you may remember, start script is a type of function that we call on all scripts that have it in our start game manager, so when the player leaves the shop. And because we want to call it from that other script, we need to add a singleton pattern. Alright, let's go grab our start game manager and let's add the new lantern script. Great, so now we have initialized our lantern script. And now we just use this new value, the lantern level, to calculate how much fuel we want in our lantern. With 1 unit of lantern fuel being 1 second, I'm just gonna go and say that the lantern fuel is equal to the lantern level multiplied by 10. Great, and now that we have some fuel, let's make a coroutine to make this fuel tick. And remember to import from system collections. Now in here we want to make a loop. I want to run this loop as long as the lantern fuel is major than 0. Then in here we subtract from lantern fuel and we wait 1 second. And we're going to call this tick lantern coroutine in a new function, and I'm going to call it activate lantern. We're going to call this function when the fog starts building up. I want to just check if a lantern level is major than 0, and if it is, we call the tick lantern coroutine. Now I also want to add a visual feedback, so I want the player to be able to see how much fuel is left in the lantern. So let's head back to Unity, let's close the shop panel, And in the game panel, I'm gonna make some new UI. Alright, so as you can see, I made a new empty game object in the game panel and stretched it to all four corners. And then inside, I've put on the bottom right corner a lantern image, which we won't interact with directly, and then a lantern fuel text, which will change based on the lantern fuel. Alright, now back to the script. We want a reference to both the panel and the lantern fuel text. Great, now what I want to do is enabling or disabling the panel when we activate or deactivate the lantern, and also update constantly the lantern fuel text. Great, and now in the activate lantern function, we're gonna expand on it, and we're also gonna enable the UI. Great, now let's grab the fog script. In here we grab the activate fog function, and we call the lantern script. Great, and now back to the lantern. I probably made a mistake before, sorry. That's what you should write in here in the start script function. Now we have a singleton pattern. When we leave the shop, we set the level of the lantern, and we also set the fuel of the lantern. And then when the fog starts, we activate the lantern, but only if it is of level greater than 0. And if it is, we begin the coroutine, which is gonna take a value every second. And we also enable the panel that shows the image of a lantern and the lantern fuel text, and we change the lantern fuel text to be equal over lantern fuel. Now we also want to add in our tick lantern an update to the UI, so right here. And before we reach the end of the loop, we also want to check whether the lantern fuel is 0, and if it is, we deactivate the lantern panel. Alright, let's go to Unity. In here, let's select our player, and let's drag the references for the UI. And I'm also gonna enable the shop panel again. And let's also disable the lantern panel by default. Great, and let's see how it looks. You can see that I have a level 1 lantern item, and if I select the boat player and I go into debug mode, you can see that it's 0, right here, but when I hit play, it triggers. And now when we reach the fog, you can see that the lantern is activated and shows how much fuel is left, just like right here. And when it's done, it closes. Perfect. Now we just need to add actual functionality to this lantern. So to do this, we'll just grab a reference to one of our fog sprites, the one without the animator, and we'll just disable or enable this fog sprite based on the lantern fuel. So let's go back to the script, and in here we make a reference to the fog. Then we take it and we disable it in the activate lantern function. And then we enable it when we lose the lantern fuel. So right here. Great. Now let's go back to Unity, select our player again, and add the fog sprite. And let's see how it looks. I'm also going to add a new level for the lantern. So you will see that now I have 10 extra seconds. And you can see that the fog 1 sprite isn't activated. And you can see much better now. And when the fuel runs off, you can see that the fog comes back right up. You can also add an animation to this if you prefer. Make it so that instead of enabling or disabling the game object, you just play a certain animation in the fog to make it thinner or thicker. But I wouldn't worry about that right now. Alright, so now that our lantern works, let's make it so we can add more fuel to the lantern as we go. So as the player collects enough beauties in a row, it's going to activate the player bonus, and the player bonus may add some fuel to the lantern. So to do this, let's grab our boat player and let's grab our player bonus script. In here, as you may remember, we have a function that we call when we collect a beauty to check whether we have collected enough beauties in a row to get the bonus. And then we call this getBonus function that tells us how much bonus money we've gotten. So instead of just always getting some extra money, I want to add a chance to get the lantern fuel. We're gonna have to juggle this function a bit, so let's go step by step. First, I want to draw a random number from 1 to 100. Then, based on that number, I want to either get the lantern fuel or the money. But I also don't want to get the lantern fuel if the player doesn't have a lantern. So to do that, we need to check the lantern level. And that value is currently private. So let's go back to the lantern script. And in here, let's make a value public with a public get and a private set property. Now back to the player bonus script. In here, we can say that we have a 50-50 chance. And we also add the lantern level condition. While here, we're gonna give the player some money. But what if our number is less than 50, but we don't have a lantern? We don't want to go on. We want to repeat this quest to find the perfect item to give the player. So we'll wrap all this code in a while loop. And when we do find the thing that we're looking for, we're just gonna break from the loop. Then let's add the int bonus money random range to the start of the script. And then we're gonna change this value only when we grab the beauty money. Now, for actually adding some extra fuel to our lantern, we need to make a new function. So let's go back in the lantern script and let's make a new public void function called add extra fuel. In here, you can decide yourself how much fuel you want to add. Me, I'm just gonna do again as the start, so I'm gonna multiplicate the lantern level times 10. Now we also need to check whether the curtain was currently going before we add extra fuel. If it was already going, we can just add fuel and not worry about it. But if the curtain was stopped, we need to activate it again. Before we add fuel, we check whether that value is 0, and if it is, we start the curtain. And we also add the fuel before starting a curtain, and we also add an else statement so that we don't add it 2 times. Alright, and finally, to make things work, we're gonna change a little bit this function, so that we're gonna call the text immediately, sure. We're gonna take away from the lantern fuel value only after we have waited 1 second. This way, if the lantern fuel is 1, and it's gonna wait 1 second, then it's gonna go to 0 and it won't be called again. And if during this second we're gonna add some extra fuel, it won't matter. If we did things like before, so if we first removed 1 lantern fuel value before waiting 1 second, it could happen that the fuel value was 1, then it was reduced to 0, and while we wait for the second to go, we'd add some extra fuel, and because the lantern fuel is 0, we will try to start the curtain again, which we don't want to. Instead, by waiting the second first and removing the value later, we avoid that problem. Alright, now let's go to the player bonus function, and in here we call that new function we just made. Great, and the only thing left is the animation. Right now we spawn a new animation and image that has the sprite of a booty. I want to change the sprite accordingly to the bonus that we're giving the player. So let's make a new function for that. This function, given a sprite, is gonna spawn an item with that sprite. Easy as that. To actually change the sprite of this, we just need to grab it. We say bonus animation spawned, and instead of get component, we use get component in children, because if you remember, this prefab has the sprite on a children, not on the main game object. And we change it to sprite to use. Finally, we call this function using a different sprite for each outcome. We also need a reference to the sprites though, so let's add them. Now we can just call the functions. Oops, I've actually used some sprite renders instead of sprites. Alright, better. Now let's go to Unity. Let's add the new images. and let's see how it looks. I'm also gonna reduce the amount needed for beauties in a row for the bonus, so you can see it clearly right now. You can see that now I got a beauty, and now again I got a lantern fuel, so these are good and great. Another thing though, it could happen that we get some fuel before we actually see the fog, so we have to add a new condition to our add bonus. So let's go back to the player bonus script, and in here we don't just check a random number, we don't just check if we have a lantern level, we also check whether the fog is on or not. To do that, let's go grab the fog script, and in here let's add a new public boolean value with a public get private set. And we're going to turn this value to true when we activate the fog. Great, now let's go in the player bonus and let's ask for that value. Alright, so we've got our lantern, it works, we can refuel it, it's all good and great. Now let's do the same for the net, and it's gonna be much easier. Let's grab the net script, and in here we want to add a new value to know the level of the nets with a public get private set property. Then we change the nets available to be of nets level, and then we say that the nets available are equal to the nets level. I do this because when we add an act, I want to make it so we don't have more than the maximum capacity, and we know the maximum capacity based on the nets level. In here I want to add a value that tells me whether we can add a net to this script. Now how do we make this? Well, it's very simple, we just make a slightly more complicated property. Let's make a new public boolean value, and we're just gonna need a get property. In here we just need to return whether nets available is minor than nets level. And that's it. Then let's make a new function to actually add a net. And you can see that I've just added one nets available and updated the nets UI. And now we can go back to the player bonus script, and to add the new net part of the code, first we decide the chance for this of happening. So I'm gonna go with 25% net, 25% lantern, and 50% beauty. So in here I just add an if statement and make it so it concatenates with the others. And instead of random, we actually say random number. And then we just need to check whether we can add a net. And we also want to check whether our nets level is measured than 0. And sure, we could just get the nets level, but if we want to be really fancy, we can also do this. Back in here, we can add an AND operator and ask for the nets level. This way, with just one value, we know whether the nets level is measured than 0 and if we have less than the maximum capacity. To make things more coherent in our code, I'm gonna remove this, and instead, in our player bonus script, I'm just gonna ask for the level directly, just like we did right here. Of course, you can choose how to do it, it's up to you. One advice I will give you though, be coherent within your code. If you do one thing in an if statement, also do it in the other. If you can, of course. Now in here we call the next function. I also want to spawn the animation, but we need a new sprite. And finally, remember to break from the code. Alright, that's it. Now let's see how it all looks in Unity. But before, of course, add the next image. Alright. Okay, as you can see, I can buy the lantern item. Now it's max level. When I hit play, nothing happens. But when I encounter the fog, you can see that the lantern appears and tells me how much fuel I have left. And because I have the lantern, I can see through the fog much better. If I collect enough beauty in a row, I can get a bonus, which as you can see gives me some extra fuel for the lantern. And right now I don't have any other item, so I can only get bonus gold or bonus fuel for the lantern. But let's say I also buy the nets item. Now when I play, when I use one of the nets, so I have less than the maximum amount, I can also get the next item, as you can see. Perfect! Alright, so that's it for this episode. I hope you learned something new. If you have any doubts about the code or any suggestion about the next topic or something that you'd like to see, Do tell me in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content and you want more. In the next episode, we see how to add external links to our game. We'll make it so that the player, within the menu, will be able to visit external links, and that is the Play Store, where he can leave a review for your game, your social profile if you want to, and in case you have one, you can also add a link to your game's wiki. By the way, I made a wiki for BoatVenture. It's only in Italian for now, but you can check it out if you want. Alright, and I'll see you next time. See ya!